Islamic Sicily, A History, Chapter 6, The Normans in Sicily. According to Aimé of Monte Cassino, a band of Norman knights returning from a pilgrimage to Jerusalem arrived near Salerno at a time when it was being besieged by the Arabs and put the besiegers to flight. Impressed by the courage and military skill of these Norman adventurers, Gaimard IV, the Prince of Salerno, sent a message to Normandy inviting Norman auxiliaries to join his army. This invitation is said to have brought many Norman adventurers and their followers to southern Italy. It is possible, however, that this story is legendary. In the 11th century, when the Normans made their appearance in southern Italy, the region was divided into several small units. Apulia and Calabria were under Byzantine occupation. Gaeta, Naples, and Amalfi were small republics. Benevento, Capua, and Salerno were Lombard principalities. The early Norman adventurers entering the service of Gaimard IV of Salerno and other princelings invaded Byzantine territory and succeeded in establishing themselves in southern Italy at the expense of the Byzantines. Their leader was William of the Iron Arm, one of the sons of Tancred of Hauteville. In 1048 AD, William died, and his brother Drogo came to be regarded as leader of the Apulian Normans. Drogo's brother, Robert Guiscard, arrived later, and to him was assigned the conquest of Calabria. Robert Guiscard's early career was one of unabashed brigandage. He shrank from no violence, and nothing was sacred to him. He respected neither old age, nor women and children, and on occasion he spared neither church nor monastery. Though Drogo was killed in a plot against the Romans in 1051 AD, their power continued to increase. At last, Pope Leo IX took up arms against them in alliance with Argyrus, the Byzantine strategist of Bari, but he was defeated and taken prisoner by the Normans in 1053 AD, and not released until he had agreed to all their demands. In 1057 AD, Robert Guiscard threatened Reggio, the gateway to Sicily. His brother Roger had recently arrived in southern Italy and was established by him at Monteleone. In 1058 AD, Robert and Roger quarreled, and Roger took up a career of brigandage by which his brother's territory suffered most. Robert Guiscard made peace with him, giving him half of Calabria. Dear listeners, support me with Buy Me a Coffee or a Super Thanks. In 1059 AD, the Normans were reconciled with Pope Nicholas II, and the latter received an oath of fealty from Guiscard and conferred upon him the investiture for the Duchy of Apulia, Calabria, and Sicily. In 1060, Guiscard took Taranto, Brindisi, and Reggio from the Byzantines. With the occupation of Reggio, he and his brother Roger were irresistibly attracted to Sicily, but the Byzantine challenge to their rear in Apulia was still there. Between 1060 AD and 1071 AD, Guiscard remained locked in the struggle with the Byzantines, a struggle from which he emerged successful. But as a result of this preoccupation with the Byzantines, his role in the conquest of Sicily became secondary to that of his brother Roger. The richness and fertility of the island must have tempted the Normans, while the presence of Muslims in Sicily must have appeared to them as posing a threat to their newly acquired Italian possessions. The civil war and anarchy in Sicily attracted them. According to Arab historians, Ibn at-Tumna had offered to the Normans the whole island as the price of their help, but according to European sources, only a part of it. In any case, he sent one of his sons as a hostage to Robert Guiscard. The stage for the Norman conquest of Italy was also set by the victories of the Genoese and the Pisans against the Arabs. Roger made the first probe into Sicily in 1060 AD, and embarking from Reggio, attacked Messina, which defended itself successfully. Roger retired to the mainland. A Christian tradition that he had been invited by the Christians of the island may be discounted. In February 1061 AD, Roger attacked Messina again, this time at the invitation of Ibn at-Tumna, and was again unsuccessful. These two early failures convinced Roger that no progress was possible in Sicily until Messina was reduced. He and Robert Guiscard set themselves to the task of gathering a strong expeditionary force for the purpose. This intelligence was not lost upon the Muslim defenders of Messina, who asked Ibn al-Hawas for reinforcements. Roger landed at Galgara, south of Messina, defeated the Muslim expeditionary force that was approaching to help Messina, and then, at the head of a Norman army of 2,000, at last occupied that city. The greater part of the Muslim garrison of Messina fled from the battlefield. Muslim women, children, slaves, and enormous booty fell to the share of the Normans. Guiscard made Messina the center of Norman operations in Sicily and reconstructed its fortifications. The Normans occupied Rametta easily, as its governor was probably a partisan of Ibn at-Tumna. The Christian population in the region between Rametta and Frenzano offered the Normans no resistance. Through the valley of Semeto, the army of Roger proceeded to Centobi, but could not occupy it. It occupied Paterno, however, in the province of Catania. It has been suggested that this Norman expedition in 1061 AD may have aimed at restoring to Ibn at-Tumna this territory, which seems to have been occupied by Ibn al-Hawas, for in this region the Normans did not meet with any serious resistance. The Normans met real resistance, however, in the siege of Castrogiovanni, where Ibn al-Hawas had gathered around him a large army. They were unable to take that strong fortress, but pillaged the neighboring areas. In the siege of Castrogiovanni, the Normans had Robert Guiscard at their head, while Roger sacked the area of Girgenti. Failing to take Castrogiovanni, the Normans retired, still holding Messina and the foothold they had established in Sicily. Towards the end of 1061 AD, Roger again pillaged the area between Messina and Girgenti, and the Christians of Troina surrendered that town to him. In the spring of 1062 AD, he made another incursion in conjunction with Ibn at-Tumna, and occupied Petralia near Cefalu. While Roger returned to Italy, Ibn at-Tumna continued the campaign and was slain in a skirmish. His death deprived the Normans of a valuable ally. They had to vacate Troina and Petralia and fall back on Messina. At this juncture, another quarrel between Robert Guiscard and Roger broke out, but was soon patched up for fear of an insurrection, and the two brothers agreed to a mutual condominium over every town and every stronghold in Calabria. Roger was now able to turn his full attention to Sicily, but at this juncture the Christian population turned against him because of the way of the Normans violated their women. After a long siege, however, he was able to reoccupy Troina. In the meantime, soon after experiencing the first impact of the Normans, some Sicilian Muslims had taken refuge in Ifriqiya and reported to Mu'izz bin Badis the miserable situation of the Muslims on the island and the discord among them. Mu'izz sent a naval force towards Sicily, but it was dispersed by a storm near Pantelleria. Tamim, who succeeded his father Mu'izz in 1062 AD, decided to send another expeditionary force under his two sons, Ayub and Ali. Ayub landed in Palermo and established the suzerainty of his father in the area ranging from Mazara to Cefalu. Ali, aided by Ibn al-Hawas, established himself in Girgenti and then helped to reinforce Castrogiovanni. For some time after 1063 AD, Ayub was the principal Muslim military leader in Sicily, but discord had developed between the Sicilian Muslims and the North African Expeditionary Force. Ayub and Ibn al-Hawas quarreled and fought, and the latter was slain. Ayub became the master of Girgenti, Castrogiovanni, and Palermo. Between 1065 AD and 1067 AD, there was no major battle between the Muslims and the Normans, but in 1068 AD, Roger inflicted a decisive defeat on Ayub at Misselmeri, which demoralized and lowered the prestige of the North African faction, so that it departed with Ayyub for North Africa, leaving the Sicilian Muslims seriously disorganized. They had respite for a few years, however, until 1071 AD, since Roger was away in Italy helping his brother in the siege of Bari. After the fall of Bari, Robert Guiscard organized a fleet to help with the capture of Palermo, which, if besieged only by land, could still have been supplied by sea. His navy consisted of sailors from Bari, Calabrians, and Greeks. On their way to Palermo, the Normans treacherously occupied the seat of the successors of Ibn at-Tumna, who were still their allies. The Norman forces then converged on Palermo and besieged it by land and sea. A North African contingent which came to the help of the beleaguered metropolis penetrated the blockade, but with severe losses. The siege lasted for several months. A famine took toll of both the besieged and the besiegers. At last, in January 1072 AD, Palermo surrendered, and its Muslim population was given assurances of the protection of life, religion, and laws. The fall of Palermo led to the submission of Mazzara also, but Castrogiovanni continued to resist. In 1072 AD, the whole of the northern coast of the island was in Norman hands. In the west, the Norman writ ran to Mazzara, and in the east to Messina. The Muslims in the center of the island thus found themselves outflanked on both sides. The Norman possessions in the island were partitioned between the two brothers. Guiscard retained the suzerainty of the island and directly controlled Palermo, a part of Messina, and Valdimone. The rest fell to the share of Roger, who was invested by his brother as the Count of Sicily. After the fall of Palermo, the Muslims held out even in Valdimone, in a triangle surrounded by the Norman possessions of Messina, Troina, and Catania. Their center was Taormina. The Muslims were also the masters of Trapani and the surrounding areas. Arab areas professed allegiance either to the Emir of Castrogiovanni in the center or to the Emir of Syracuse in the south. In 1072 AD, the hero of the Muslim resistance in the south was one Benevert or Benarvet, according to the European chronicles, probably the Ibn Abbad, who was eulogized by the famous Sicilian poet Ibn Hamdis. At this stage, the Muslim part of the island was totally in arms against the Normans. An appeal for help was sent to the Zirid Tamim, and in 1074 AD he sent a flotilla which raided Nicotra in Calabria, and in 1075 AD made a landing near Mazzara, only to be repulsed by the Normans. In reprisal for the Muslim raids, especially Benevert's activities, Roger made such severe depredations that in 1076 and in 1078 AD, Sicily suffered from a terrible famine. In 1079 AD, Roger organized an expedition against Taormina, and they treated with him as an equal. In fact, he represented stability and power amidst the general anarchy in the Norman dominions of Italy. In return for his services in arbitration, Roger of Sicily extorted from his nephew the cession to himself of strongholds in Calabria, as well as Guiscard's half of Palermo. Roger of Sicily became one of the leading personalities of Europe. His alliance was sought by Count Raymond IV of St. Gilles, Philip I of France, Conrad, son of Henry IV, and Kalman, also known as Koloman, King of Hungary. His nephew was unable to give the protection required by the Holy See, so Urban II offered him that position in 1098 AD, and conceded to him the apostolic legateship. The effect of this was that papal intervention in Roger's state could be exercised only through the Count himself. Thus, with the help of a strong military force, a considerable part of which was Muslim, Roger of Sicily was enabled to bring back Sicily back into the mainstream of European politics. Soon after the death of his brother, Roger began the division of his possessions in Sicily and Italy into fiefs and distributed them amongst the members of his family and his companions. Sicily, which had a large Muslim population, thus became feudalized. This division in some cases preserved the distribution of territories as it had been in Muslim times, and the fiefs then corresponded to former Muslim military districts known as Aqalim. From surviving platae, that is the lists maintained by the feudatories of the villeins in the fiefs assigned to them, it appears that a vast number of these villeins were Muslims. In the decade which followed the completion of the conquest, 1091 to 1101 AD, Roger ruled the island with tranquility and tolerance. The only considerable revolt against him was that of the Muslims of Pantalica, and this was easily suppressed. On the whole, the Muslims, whom he treated with tolerance, remained obedient to him. In his attacks on Amalfi and Capua in 1098 AD, the Muslim element in his army was prominent. For reasons of state, he resisted the ecclesiastical pressure for the conversion of Muslims to Christianity. Roger died on 22nd June 1101 AD at the age of 70 and at the height of his power. The regency of Roger I's widow, the Countess Adelaide, continued for a decade from 1101 AD to 1111 AD. She ruled Sicily and Calabria in the name of her son Simon until 1103 AD, and in the name of her second son, Roger II, until 1111 AD. The period of the regency appears to have been uneventful on the whole. During this period, Palermo was made the seat of government. Adelaide was sought in marriage by King Baldwin of Jerusalem towards the end of her regency in Sicily. Before leaving for Jerusalem, she stipulated that if this second marriage proved childless, the crown of Jerusalem should pass to her son Roger II. This agreement remained a dead letter, and the abandoned queen died miserably in Sicily. Roger II, who reigned from 1111 AD to 1154 AD, is the most illustrious of the Norman rulers of Sicily. In 1127 AD, on the death of his cousin William I, the Duke of Apulia, he appeared before Salerno, and Pope Honorius II was reluctantly obliged to invest him with the Duchy of Apulia also. Between 1127 AD and 1130 AD, the principalities founded by Norman chieftains in Italy and Sicily were united under his rule. Taking advantage of the double election of Anacletus II and Innocent II to the papacy in 1130 AD, Roger II promised to support the former and received from him the crown of Sicily, of Calabria and Apulia, the Principality of Capua, the honor of Naples, and the protectorate of the men of Benevento. He was crowned king at Palermo. Dear listeners, support me with Buy Me a Coffee or a Super Thanks. The German and Byzantine empires united against the new kingdom of Sicily from time to time, and both Roger II and his successor had to struggle against aggression by these empires. Papal policy, which had only reluctantly subscribed to the creation of the Kingdom of Sicily, fluctuated between support for the German emperor against Sicily and for Sicily against the emperor. In his European confrontations, Roger II made considerable use of his Sicilian Muslim troops. Roger II's main military involvement with the world of Islam consisted of his naval campaigns against and eventual occupation of several coastal towns in North Africa. The Norman fleet was organized under two Greek-born admirals, George of Antioch and Christodulus, the latter referred to as Abd-ar-Rahman an-Nasrani in Arabic chronicles. George of Antioch had formerly served the Zirid Tamim and had an intimate knowledge of the topography of the North African coast. He joined the service of Roger II in 1112 AD. The Norman fleet under these two admirals contested naval supremacy of the Mediterranean with the North African Muslim states. In 1113 AD, Zirid ships had raided Naples and Salerno, and Muslim corsairs were making the sea unsafe for European merchants and pilgrims. The internecine conflicts among the North African Muslim states, however, gave the Normans their chance. The first attempts of Roger II between 1118 AD and 1127 AD to gain a foothold in North Africa were unsuccessful. During the chaos created in North Africa by the predatory Arab tribe known as Banu Hilal, a petty Arab principality, that of Banu Jami, had established itself at Gabes. The Zurid Yahya bin Tamim evolved a modus vivendi with it, but his son Ali attacked it, and the Banu Jami appealed for help to Roger II, who, as he had trade relations with them, sent a fleet to their aid. This first Norman expedition was unsuccessful. It also started a course of hostility between the Normans and the Zirids. Ali bin Yahya appealed to the Almoravids for help, but died in 1121 AD. He was succeeded by his son Hassan, who was to be the last of the Zirids. In 1122 AD, the Banu Maimun, clients of the Almoravid Ali bin Yusuf bin Tashufin, sacked Nicotra in Calabria, massacred a part of its population, and enslaved others. Roger II sent a counter-attacking fleet against Mahdiya and Timas, commanded by George of the Antioch. The fleet was partly damaged in a storm, and such part of it as reached Mahdiya was ineffective. Of the 300 Norman vessels, only 100 survived to return to Sicily. In 1127 AD, the Banu Maimun again raided the Norman realm, attacking Patti, menacing Catania, and landing temporarily near Syracuse, where they captured booty and prisoners. Against the Almoravids, Roger II had to seek the alliance of Raymond Berenger III, the Count of Barcelona. In the meantime, the Zirid power was hopelessly declining. In 1135 AD, the Hammadid Yahya bin Abdelaziz advanced against Mahdiya. Against him, the Zirid Hassan sought the help not only of the predatory Banu Hilal, but also of his recent enemies, the Normans. These allies of his defeated the Hammadids, and a relationship which was more than a truce was established between the Zirids and the Normans. From 1135 AD onwards, Roger II's policy was to leave Mahdiya alone for the time being and, under the pretext of chastising the corsairs, to send expeditions against other points in North Africa, where the Zirid writ no longer ran. In 1135 AD, a Norman naval force occupied Jerba and held its population to ransom. From 1143 AD onwards, the Norman expeditions against North Africa became continuous. A Sicilian naval force tried unsuccessfully to occupy Tripoli, where the Banu Matruh had asserted their independence from Zirid rule. On its way back, the Norman force ravaged the Hammadid port of Djeli. In 1144 AD, the Normans attacked Barashk, also known as Bresk, and the islands of Kerkena. In 1146 AD, they succeeded in defeating the Banu Matruh and occupying Tripoli, the first major North African town to fall into their hands. In the actual conquest of Tripoli by the Normans, there was much looting and destruction, and many Arab and Berber women were seized, but soon a general amnesty was proclaimed. Those who had fled the city returned, and the citizens were granted their civic, personal, and religious rights on payment of jizya. In 1147 AD, a usurper seized power at Gabes. The emir of Banu Jami appealed for help to Hassan the Zirid, while the usurper asked the Normans for help. Hassan occupied Gabes and executed the usurper. This gave Roger II the chance to break his peace with Hassan. A Norman fleet under George of Antioch occupied Mahdiya. This was in a way Roger's token participation in the crusade. As in Tripoli, an amnesty was soon proclaimed in Mahdiya, and the city soon settled down to the same busy life it had led under the Zirids on whom the sun had now set. In 1148 AD, the Normans also occupied Sousse, Sfax, and Gabes. Though George of Antioch died in 1152 AD, the Norman conquest of the coastal towns of North Africa continued, and in 1153 AD, Beaune was occupied. Apart from Tunis and one or two other towns, all the coastal towns of North Africa paid tribute to Roger II, who added to his titles that of the King of Ifriqiya. Roger II's rule on the North African coast was as benign for the Muslims as it was in Sicily. He restored cities, furnished capital for the merchants, was charitable to the poor, and appointed acceptable qadis. While Roger II's navy was occupying the coast of Africa, there is evidence to believe that he pursued a policy of detente with the Fatimids of Egypt, with whom his trade relations must have been satisfactory. Commerce and grain trade between Sicily and the states of North Africa seems to have continued even during their long years of hostilities. Roger II died in 1154 AD at the age of 58. The security, peace and prosperity which prevailed in his dominions was in a sharp contrast to the general situation in Europe. He reformed the judicial code and enforced law and order. In improving the civil administration, he made use of capable men speaking various languages and belonging to various religious persuasions. Only towards the end of his rule did he become intolerant. In his earlier career, in fact during most of his reign, his conduct was such that Ibn al-Athir praised him for protecting and liking the Muslims. He was surrounded by Muslims among others, and is said to have laid Muslim women in his harem, as well as Muslim slaves and eunuchs in his entourage. He delighted in the company of learned Muslims, and in his last 14 years spent much time in scientific speculations in the Arab tradition. There were even unfounded rumors among both Muslim and Christian subjects of his kingdom that he was a crypto-Muslim. Of the 5 principal luminaries of his court, 2, Abu Sa'd Umayyah and Idrisi, were Arabs, and the other 3, Eugenius, Nilus Toxopatrius, and Theophanes Chiremius, were Greeks. Though he knew both Greek and Arabic, he preferred to use Greek in his diplomatic correspondence, even with Muslim rulers. At the same time, he was a champion of the Christian Church. He built 2 magnificent religious monuments, the Palatine Chapel and the Cathedral at Kefalu. It has been suggested that he wished to be in control of a national church, a concept in which Byzantine influence can be traced, where the aim was to combine temporal and religious authority. Roger II was succeeded by his son William I, who reigned from 1154 AD to 1166 AD. Much less energetic than his father, he left the business of state to his ministers. In 1154 and 1155 AD, the Byzantines occupied Bari, Trani, Gioninazzo, and Molfetta. Papal forces also marched against him, and there were revolts by his own vassals. In 1156 AD, however, William subdued the rebels and reoccupied the towns which had been occupied by the Byzantines. Pope Hadrian IV had to retreat with him and confirmed him in his Sicilian and Italian dominions. Dear listeners, support me with Buy Me a Coffee or a Super Thanks. His chief minister Mayo, also known as Mahon, gained in power and influence after 1156 AD. The party led by Mayo and the Queen Margaret was the party of the palace and was opposed to the party of the nobles, some of whom had participated in the earlier rebellion. The party of the palace included palace functionaries, of whom many were Muslims, and played an important part in the financial administration of Mayo. The nobles blamed Mayo for the strong action which had been taken against them by William I after the rebellion, and for being denied a share in the government. Mayo was also unpopular among the citizens of large towns, who blamed him for depriving them of their municipal liberties and for taxing them heavily. Finally, there was a conspiracy and a great uprising of the party of the nobles and other elements who assassinated Mayo in 1161 AD. They even seized the person of the king, but had to release him under popular and ecclesiastical pressure. William I then successfully dealt with the nobles both in Sicily and in southern Italy. The disorder in Sicily had its counterpart in North Africa. William I lost the empire of North African outposts built by his father. Though Tunis in Egypt was sacked in 1154 AD by the Normans, this was really a continuation of the momentum generated by the North African conquests under Roger II. A North African reaction to the momentum now set in. Umar bin al-Hussein al-Furiyani revolted successfully at Sfax in 1156 AD. The example of Sfax was followed by the islands of Jerba and Kerkena. In 1158 AD, the Banu Madru reasserted their rule at Tripoli. At Gabes, Muhammad bin Rashid, who had been appointed Qaid by the Normans, revolted successfully against them. In 1158 AD, William I sent 20 galleys to suppress a revolt at Zawila, with some success. By 1159 AD, however, the relentless march of the Almohad leader, Abd al-Mu'min, sealed the fate of the Norman possessions in North Africa. In 1160 AD, Abd al-Mu'min starved the Norman garrison of Mahdiya to submission and brought the Norman adventure in North Africa to a close. William I was by nature indolent, possibly cruel, but it is debatable whether he deserved the title Bad applied to him by Falcundas, an advocate of the party of the nobles. William was averse from politics and inclined more than his father to the pleasures of the semi-Muslim life of court and seraglio. Like his father, he loved to discuss literary and philosophical questions with learned Greeks and Muslims. Before his death in 1166 AD, William I had appointed his Queen Margaret regent of the kingdom, but her power was usurped by a council of 10 established by the rebellious nobles. An Englishman, Walter of Hamil, who was appointed Archbishop of Palermo in 1169 AD, succeeded in depriving the Council of Ten of the power it had usurped and returned to the administrative policies of Roger II and William I. He retained the confidence of William II when he reached maturity and took the reins of the government in his hands. William II, who reigned from 1166 AD to 1189 AD, unlike his father, was popular in the realm and is remembered in history as William the Good. He was a minor of 13 years at his accession. His actual reign begins from 1171 AD. Against the advice of his ministers, he sent expeditions across the Mediterranean against Muslim possessions. This policy was primarily religious, although it aimed at exerting pressure for the protection of Sicilian trade with the Levant. Its basic objectives were to keep communications open between Europe and the Holy Land and to extend Norman protection to the Christian communities of the Levant. William II was one of the first to assume the cross at the beginning of the Third Crusade, though he could not personally participate in it and died in 1189 AD. However, his admiral Margaritus was the hero of Christian exploits near Laodicea. During his reign, there were several harassing raids against the Egyptian coast. There was a Norman raid against Damietta in 1169 AD. In 1174 AD, a powerful Norman fleet of 280 galleys carrying 30,000 men and 1,500 horses attacked Alexandria, but could not make any effective headway against the fortification of the city or the Egyptian military force organized by Salah ad-Din. The Norman fleet raided Tunis twice between 1175 AD and 1178 AD, and during the latter of these raids sacked the town. During 1180 and 1181 AD, William II sent a naval task force against the Balearics, which were then under the occupation of the Almoravid Banu Ghaniya. This expedition did not achieve any results as the Norman allies, the Genoese, made a separate peace with the Banu Ghaniya. About the same time a treaty was concluded between William II and the Almohad Abu Yusuf Yaqub. The treaty was motivated perhaps more by mutual commercial interests than by a common hostility towards the Banu Ghaniya. We have Ibn Jubair's evidence of navigation and trade between Norman Sicily and Andalusia, though most of the vessels involved were probably of Genoese ownership. Devoid of the vigorous qualities of the Normans, a recluse among the pleasures of his harem and his pleasances, William II never led his forces personally on the battlefield, but he was a shrewd politician and his reign was peaceful and tranquil. He was also, like his father and grandfather, familiar with Arabic speech and learning, and he built the Monreal and La Cuba. Dante chose to place him in paradise. Dear listeners, support me with Buy Me a Coffee or a Super Thanks. William II died childless. According to his wish, Constance, a daughter of Roger II, who was married to the German Emperor Henry VI, should have succeeded to the throne of Sicily. But the Sicilian nobles divided themselves into three factions, and in 1190 AD, Tancred of Lecce, an illegitimate son of Duke Roger of Apulia, and thus a grandson of Roger II, was placed on the throne by Matthew of Agello, who became the chancellor. There were several revolts against Tancred, including a fateful one by the Muslims of Sicily, which kept him occupied during the first year of his reign. After a massacre of the Muslims of Palermo, most of them took to the mountains of the interior and occupied a number of strong fortresses. Their numbers were swelled by Muslim serfs, escaping from the Norman overlords and joining them. This revolt and its suppression was, as we shall see later, the beginning of the end of the Muslim presence in Sicily. The Third Crusade arrived at the doorstep of Sicily, and Richard, Coeur de Lion, occupied Messina, but Tancred came to terms with him. Henry VI was in meantime planning to occupy Sicily, claiming the inheritance of his wife Constance. He concluded treaties with Genoa and Pisa to neutralize them, and in 1191 AD laid siege to Naples and Salerno, while the Empress Constance installed herself in the palace of Terracina. The emperor had to return to Germany, however, because of an epidemic which had broken out in his army, and the empress was seized by the citizens at Salerno and handed over 10 Tancred of Lecce, who had to set her free on pressure from Pope Celestine III. Tancred died in 1194 AD. He was not without intellectual capacity, was familiar with the Greek language, and like his predecessors was steeped in Arab Byzantine culture. William III, a minor, succeeded his father Tancred, with his mother Sibylla acting as regent. Henry VI marched south again in 1194 AD, concluded a treaty with the Lombard towns, obtained the help of the fleets of Pisa and Genoa, and with swiftness and ease conquered the kingdom of Sicily, ending the Norman chapter of the history of the island. End of chapter 6.